How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another Skyrim comparison video. And today, as you saw in the title and thumbnail, we're talking about one-handed weapons. Which class is the best? This is one that this is a topic that I actually wanted to figure out when I was making a completely separate video. I was trying to figure out just how powerful you could make a warrior in Skyrim, and that video is coming soon. But in thinking about how I could make the most powerful warrior in Skyrim, I completely got ahead of myself. I was thinking, well, what even is the best weapon you could use? A dagger, a sword, an axe, or a mace. So for those of you who don't fully know, there's really three factors that each one of these changes: speed, damage, and stagger. Aside from that, there's not really any relevant changes between the four, sorry. So a dagger, so the four classes, a dagger does the least damage out of all of them. It swings the fastest out of all of them, and when you power attack, it has 0 stagger. No matter what, it would never stagger an enemy, no matter the size or the whatever. Daggers do not stagger anything, but they're the fastest and do the most damage, do the least damage. Swords, when you power attack something, they do a little bit of stagger, and they also do a solid amount of damage, and they swing pretty quick. Axes do a bit more damage than swords, and they have a bit more stagger, but they swing just a bit more slowly. And maces do the most damage. They have the most stagger, but they swing the slowest, almost as slow as a great sword, actually. So if you really think about it, like logistically, none of those necessarily matter, do they? Because they kind of all cancel themselves out, right? A sword does the least damage out of... Okay, first of all, we're gonna ignore daggers, because that's just such a joke. You would never use a dagger as your main weapon, unless you're playing an assassin, in which case that is a completely irrelevant topic to this discussion. So for now, I'm not gonna talk about daggers much. So we're gonna be talking about sword, axes, and mace. Swords are the fastest, but they do the least damage, whereas maces are the slowest, but they do the most damage. So you would think the DPS would be the same, right? It doesn't matter if you swing slowly, you do more damage, but if you swing faster, you do less damage. So what really is the equalizing factor out of this? And you may think, well, okay, it's obviously stagger, right? It's obviously stagger, because a mace, when you stagger someone, not only do you do a lot of damage, but they fall back, and it takes them longer time to get back up to a fighting position than if you just use a sword. You know, you get more hits off, and that you would be right in thinking that if it wasn't for the fact that maces are the slowest. So the fact that they take longer to get back into fighting position when you stagger them is actually also irrelevant, because you can get the same amount of hits off basically with a mace as you could a sword. So it's kind of a complicated question, and maybe it's the reason why you don't see many people talking about this. It's because realistically it's not so important, especially in the early game. So why am I even making this video then, if it's such an easy, obvious, they're all the same? Well, there's a bit of nuance to it. So before we mention perk points, because yeah, we're gonna get into that, and that is actually going to make and break this discussion. Before we get into that, it doesn't actually completely balance out. I was a little bit being lenient with the definition of that. When you power attack something with a sword, you can usually get 2, maybe 3 hits off on it before it gets back up into fighting position. That's if you don't knock him out of your reach, of course. With an axe, you can almost always get 2 attacks before he gets back up. You can maybe even get 2 and then already be swinging your 3rd. And with a mace, you could usually get 1, guaranteed 1, maybe even like a 2nd one if you're lucky. But generally speaking, with a mace, you can only get 1 in before, you know, he gets back up and ready to put his shield up or ready to swing at you. So for that reason, I would have to say that if we're not talking about perk points, maces are out of the discussion, as well as not only do their stagger is not as powerful as axes or swords, but also the fact that they are so slow can actually be quite punishing. As like I said, it kind of balances out between the slowness and the damage. Not really, because if you are swinging a mace and you get about 90% of the way before you finish the swing, right before you hit the enemy, and he just gets out of reach from you, that would not have happened if you used a quicker weapon. Or if he shield bashes you, then, you know, you missed a hit. And when your weapon is so slow, but it does a lot of damage, you rely on not missing. You rely on every hit hitting and counting. With a sword, you could make 3 mistakes, no punishment, completely fine. But with a mace, you don't have that luxury. Every mistake is punishing. With a sword, mistakes are not as punishing, and honestly they don't matter that much, as each hit is very frequent. Okay, so right now I would say probably axes are the one that is winning, as they do more damage than swords, and they have good stagger, and they aren't super slow. But let's talk about perk points, and this really does make a world of difference. So in vanilla Skyrim, there's actually no perk points that positively or even negatively affect daggers. So we're going to continue to keep them out of the discussion. But there is 3 trees you can go into: the sword tree, the axe tree, and the mace tree. Now for swords, you put perks into the sword tree, and each one allows you to do crit damage when you use swords. A crit damage is basically the same as regular damage, but it does a little bit more. So there's actually 3 ranks to this. Rank 1 of Bladesman will give you a 10% chance of doing crit damage. Bladesman rank 2 will give you a 15% chance of doing a crit damage, and rank 3 will give you a 20% chance of doing crit damage. So basically, if you get rank 3, every 5 hits, one of them will be a crit, which does quite a bit more damage than regular. So that's obviously it's incredibly powerful. For any build, like really, if you're fighting anything you fight, whether it's a dragon, a giant, a mammoth, a bandit, forsworn, draugr, literally anything, a cave bear, everything is susceptible to crit damage. There's not one combat situation you could be in where you would use your sword and this would not be beneficial. So, for axes, you have bleed damage. Rank 1 of the hack and slash perk, attacks with war axes cause extra bleeding damage to be done. Now, I couldn't actually, so from what I understand, bleed damage is actually relative to the power of the weapon that you have. So if you're using an iron war axe, for 3 seconds, you would do 1 extra damage per second with the bleed. Whereas if you're using a Daedric war axe, you would do 2 points of bleed damage for 6 seconds for a total of 12 damage. Now obviously 12 damage when you're at the Daedric stage of the game, especially over a course of 6 seconds, like 12 damage is not a lot of damage, especially when your weapons at that point are going to be doing upwards of 40, and you're going to be hitting an enemy every like 1 to 1.5 seconds. 12 over the course of 6, not much. But that bleed does increase with every perk you put into it, and when you have the 3rd point at a Daedric level weapon, you do 3 points of bleed damage for 6 seconds for a total of 18, which again at that stage of the game simply is not much, and I could not possibly see that being the make or break of any combat situation. Like, if you think about it, Helgen Keep, you kill 5 frostbite spiders. Each one of them has a poison on them that does 5 damage a second for, I believe, 4 seconds. So the fucking frostbite venom, the level 1 poison in the game, the worst poison in the game, is better than a bleed effect that you're supposedly going to be using at the end game. So for that reason, war axes really, you may as well be wiping your ass with perk points at that point. It is very not good. Okay, so that's Bladesman, that's hack and slash. Now what about maces? What is their perk ability? Well, it is actually deceptively good. Bone Breaker is the one for maces. Rank 1, maces will ignore 25% of the armor rating of an enemy. Now that sounds extraordinarily enticing. So rank 2 of Bone Breaker ignores 50% of the armor rating of an enemy, and rank 3 is 75%. So with what that says is when you have all 3 ranks in the Bone Breaker, any enemy, you ignore 75% of the armor they have. So you're pretty much, if you're fighting an enemy and they have like ebony armor on, you're basically fighting an enemy with steel armor on, because you ignore so much of that protection. Now the reason why I say that is deceptively good is, yes, that does make maces extraordinarily powerful against enemies with armor rating or with armor on. However, a lot of the toughest enemies in the game don't have armor on. Dragons, they're butt-ass naked. Giants, mammoths, naked. Dragon Priest, I believe they are naked. Saber cats, wolves, bears, all naked. Every animal, naked. Draugr, naked. Atronachs, Daedra, I believe Daedra actually do have an armor rating, so never mind. But yeah, Atronachs, naked. And as a matter of fact, even bandits and Forsworn, oh my god, they have the same level 1 crappy equipment at every rank. first one have no armor rating, and they're quite difficult. Bandits, actually very few of them have armor that's better than like leather. Like, really think about it. Late game, you're still fighting bandits wearing hide and studded and leather shit. It's not like you're really ever fighting bandits with steel armor. Like, maybe some. Like, a bandit chief late game would have Nordic carved armor, you know? Mid game, I think they have orcish and like steel or steel plate. I believe even towards the very late game, they can have even better stuff than that. So really, getting that perk is minimally beneficial against most enemies. Okay, first of all, it's not beneficial against most enemies. It's minimally beneficial towards the rest of the enemies, and in very few situations, I would argue, it's extremely good. Like, I'm not gonna deny, if I'm fighting a bandit chief with full-on Nordic carved armor and a fucking enchanted orcish battle axe on legendary difficulty, I am absolutely gonna wish I had a mace with Bonebreaker level 3 on it. Don't get me wrong, it's extraordinarily good in that situation, but if I'm fighting a giant, that's not really what I'm gonna be using. I'm sorry, but if I'm fighting a dragon, I'm gonna be dual wielding my double swords with a 20% chance of getting a crit. That's just the way it is. So, the one last factor you could take into account for this argument is unique weapons. Like, let's say, you know, the average Skyrim player might not give too much of a shit about, you know, the nerdy nitty-gritty of smithing and enchanting and alchemy to make the objective best weapons. What if you just want to come across good weapons naturally? There's very few, like, actually good unique axes in the game. I think war axes got neglected when it comes to Daedric artifact or just unique quest weapons. But Mace is arguably the best weapon in the game that is not something that you can craft as a player or improve on. One of the best raw weapons in the game, probably the best, is the Mace of Morlag Ball, as not only does it have a base damage of the exact same as a Daedric Mace, which I believe makes it equally as good as the most powerful weapons in the game, but also it does 25 points of stamina damage and magicka damage to every enemy you hit, basically ensuring that the toughest mages and the toughest warriors will be crippled when you fight them. Not only that, but there's also a 3-second soul filling enchantment on it. So if you kill an enemy within 3 seconds of you last hitting it, you drop its soul. So it's like an infinitely refilling enchantment as well. Immensely powerful, and that's a mace. And then if you get the bone breaker stuff, it just makes that tenfold. Well, maybe not tenfold. You know, it's an expression. When it comes to swords, you do have quite a few good ones. Chillrend, you have the Dawnbreaker, which is an extraordinary weapon, especially early game. You also have Dragon's Bane, which is immensely powerful against dragons. And daggers, you have the Mehrunes Razor, which is great. 1% chance of every time you're hitting something, it's instantly dying. That coupled with the fact that it's extraordinarily quick, and you're gonna be hitting enemies quite often, that 1% chance does happen a lot more than you'd think. Okay, so with everything said, if I had to answer the question, what class of one-handed weapon is the best, in one sentence, my answer would be the most widely applicable is definitely without a doubt swords. There's not one combat situation where a sword would be the wrong choice, but if you want to have a backup, a extraordinarily powerful mace in the bank, in case you come across that one bandit chief that just keeps whooping your ass, that is also an extraordinary strategy, as, you know, it does a fuck ton of damage. It can cripple them. It's just, you can't go wrong with a sword, but with a mace, you're gonna be whooping ass anyways. So I say swords win, maces come on a close second. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know in the comments your opinion if you disagree or agree. I really love seeing all of the comments I get from people, their unique opinions. It really makes me think a lot harder about these topics, and actually makes me a lot more enthusiastic about making these discussion videos, because so many people are so passionate about this game and, you know, the discussion around it, that I can't help but love it. So yeah, thank you for all your support and all of your comments. Stay awesome as always.